The moon hangs impossibly low over the lake, its reflection shimmering like mercury across waters that should not exist. You've descended through layers of nightmare and madness to reach this place, where reality bends like heated glass, and the very air tastes of iron and regret. And there, at the water's edge, stands a figure that makes your hunter's blood run cold, not with fear, but with a recognition that bypasses conscious thought entirely. She wears a wedding dress stained with blood, so old it's turned the colour of rust, her hands bound in chains that seem more ceremonial than restrictive. Queen Yharnam, the Pthumerian queen, stands before you with tears of blood streaming down her pallid cheeks, and somewhere in the distance, or perhaps echoing from within her very being, you hear it, the cry of an infant that should not exist, could not exist, yet somehow does. Welcome, lore-seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 lore, where today we're unraveling one of Bloodborne's most haunting mysteries, how a mother's grief became a curse that would destroy civilizations across millennia. This isn't just a story about a boss you might encounter in the Chalice dungeons, or a ghostly figure haunting the streets. This is the tale of how Yharnam's very name became its doom, how the past literally reaches through time to strangle the future, and how one woman's tragedy set in motion a cycle of horror that may be impossible to break. Queen Yharnam appears to us 3 times throughout our hunt, each appearance more revealing than the last. First at Moonside Lake, where she weeps beneath that terrible moon. Then atop Mergo's loft, where she gazes toward the source of her child's endless crying. And finally, in the deepest reaches of the Pthumerian Hill Chalice, where we face her not as a ghost, but as something far more terrible, a consciousness that refuses to die, a mother whose loss has transcended death itself. But to understand why she haunts these places, why her presence pervades every corner of this cursed city that bears her name, we need to go back. Back to when the Pthumerians walked the earth as something more than human. Back to when the labyrinth was young and the Great Ones first took notice of humanity's potential. The Pthumerians were never quite human, not in the way we understand the term. These beings stood tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs and faces that suggested an evolution, or perhaps devolution, that took a different path from our own. In the deepest Chalice dungeons, we can still find evidence of their glory days, carved into stone that predates recorded history. The architecture alone tells a story of beings who understood geometries that hurt the human mind to contemplate, who built their civilization not upward toward the sky, but downward, always downward, as if they knew something about the cosmos that made them seek the Earth's embrace rather than the stars' cold light. If you're enjoying this exploration into Bloodborne's deepest mysteries so far, I'd genuinely appreciate if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow hunters and lore enthusiasts through YouTube's algorithm. Your support means everything and helps keep these in-depth investigations into gaming's most intricate narratives coming. The Pthumerian civilization wasn't just advanced, it was transcendent. These beings had unlocked what they called the Eldritch Truth, a form of knowledge that went beyond conventional understanding. They carved out massive labyrinths beneath the earth, creating spaces where the boundaries between dimensions grew thin. In these sacred depths, inquiry into the cosmos began, not through telescopes pointed at distant stars, but through communion with beings that existed between the spaces we can perceive. The Pthumerians didn't just discover the Great Ones. They became their earthly servants, their guardians, their chosen people. And at the apex of Pthumerian society stood their queen, a woman whose very blood carried properties that modern science would call impossible. Queen Yharnam wasn't simply a monarch in the political sense. She was a living conduit between her people and the cosmos. Her blood, more potent than any other Pthumerian's, could heal wounds, extend life, and most importantly, serve as a medium through which the Great Ones could interact with our reality. The Pthumerians revered her not just as a queen, but as something approaching divinity itself. In the stone carvings that survive in the Chalice dungeons, she's depicted with a ceremonial headdress that seems to merge with her skull, suggesting that her role was as much biological as it was ceremonial. But power of this magnitude never comes without a price, and Queen Yharnam's price would be paid not just by her, but by every civilization that would follow in Pthumeru's footsteps. The Great Ones, those impossible beings that exist partially in our world and partially in dimensions we cannot fathom, have one universal tragedy that defines their existence. They lose their children. Every Great One loses its child, and then yearns for a surrogate. This isn't just misfortune, it's a fundamental rule of the cosmos, as immutable as gravity or time. And Queen Yharnam, in her communion with these beings, would become subject to this terrible law. The Ring of Betrothal tells the story better than any historian could. This simple band of metal, imbued with meaning by the Great Ones themselves, represents a contract written in blood and sealed with cosmic significance. The ring's description speaks of a special meaning that the inhuman beings granted to this symbol of union, but what it really represents is something far more profound, a marriage between dimensions, a coupling that should never have been possible. If you're finding value in uncovering these connections between Yharnam's ancient past and its doomed present, consider subscribing to, support the channel, and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations into gaming's most complex narratives possible. Formless Oedon, the most inscrutable of all the Great Ones, chose Queen Yharnam for reasons we can only speculate about. Oedon exists without shape, without substance in the conventional sense, a being of pure concept, of blood and voice, and will without flesh to contain them. How does such a being father a child? Through blood, always through blood. The Pthumerian queen's extraordinarily potent blood served as the medium through which this impossible conception could occur. She became pregnant with Mergo, a child that existed between states of being, neither fully human nor fully Great One, neither completely alive nor entirely dead. The pregnancy itself was a catastrophe written in flesh. Queen Yharnam's wedding dress, eternally stained with blood, tells of a birth that went horrifically wrong. The blood isn't from violence inflicted upon her. It's the evidence of a pregnancy that destroyed her from within. Mergo, the impossible child, could not be born into our world properly. The fundamental incompatibility between human biology, even enhanced Pthumerian biology, and the otherworldly nature of the Great Ones created a paradox that reality itself struggled to resolve. The Yharnam stone, that terrible artifact retrieved only after defeating Queen Yharnam in the deepest Chalice dungeon, provides the most damning evidence of what happened. Described as a sacred heirloom left by the Queen, the stone is actually something far more horrific. It's Mergo, or what's left of Mergo. Look closely at the stone and you can make out the shape of a fetus, complete with eye sockets and a tiny, perfectly formed hand. This isn't just any stone. It's what happens when blood hardens after death, when that which should crystallize cannot. When a being exists in such a state of impossibility that even death cannot properly claim it. Mergo was stillborn, dying within the mother's womb before having a chance to become anything more than potential. But here's where Bloodborne's cosmic horror truly reveals itself. In this universe, death is not necessarily an ending, especially for beings touched by the Great Ones. Mergo's consciousness, that spark of awareness that never got to inhabit a proper body, didn't simply dissipate. Instead, it became something else, something worse. A formless cry echoing through dimensions, a nightmare given voice but no shape. A child that exists only as absence and longing. The school of Mensis, in their spectacular hubris generations later, would attempt to commune with this stillborn consciousness. Using the third umbilical cord, that twisted artifact that grants audience with the Great Ones, they reached out to Mergo's formless essence. The description of this cord tells us everything we need to know about how that went. It granted Mensis audience with Mergo, but resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. They succeeded in making contact with Queen Yharnam's child, but the very act of perceiving something that exists in such an impossible state caused their minds to suffer the same fate as Mergo's body, stillborn, trapped between states, neither fully dead nor properly alive. This creates the nightmare of Mensis, that hellish realm where Mergo's consciousness is trapped, eternally crying out for a mother who cannot reach it properly, for a life it never got to live. The wet nurse, that many-armed shadow that serves as Mergo's guardian, is perhaps the most tragic surrogate parent in all of fiction, caring for a child that has no body to hold, no mouth to feed, no tears to dry. It's a mockery of motherhood, a shadow play of what should have been, performed eternally in a dimension built from suffering and impossibility. But Queen Yharnam's tragedy doesn't end with her child's stillbirth. Her consciousness, her grief, her very existence becomes a curse that echoes through time. The queen lies dead, as her item description tells us, but her horrific consciousness is only asleep, stirring in unsettling motions. She becomes something between ghost and god, between memory and threat, a presence that pervades not just the physical spaces where she appears, but the very concept of what would come after Pthumeru. Consider the name of the city where our hunt takes place, Yharnam. This is no coincidence, no random honouring of an ancient queen. The city's founders knew exactly who they were naming their new home after, and this knowledge reveals something profound about who those founders really were. The name Yharnam comes from the oldest period of Pthumerian civilization, a word that would have been lost to time if not preserved in the deepest, most secure depths of the labyrinth. For the city's founders to know this name, to choose it specifically, they would need to have been intimately familiar with Pthumerian culture. The obvious conclusion: they were Pthumerians themselves, or at least their descendants. The city of Yharnam was built directly atop the old Pthumerian ruins, literally constructing a new civilization on the bones of the old. This wasn't just practical, using existing foundations and infrastructure. This was deliberate, ritualistic even. The Pthumerians who survived their civilization's collapse, who witnessed firsthand what happens when humanity reaches too greedily for transcendence, chose to build again in the same spot, with the same tools, seeking the same power. It's as if they were compelled to repeat the cycle, as if Queen Yharnam's grief had become a gravity that pulled all future ambitions toward the same terrible end. When Bjergenwerth scholars, in what would be our equivalent of the 1850s to 1890s, discovered passages into the old Pthumerian labyrinths, they weren't just finding random ruins. They were discovering a trap that had been waiting for them, baited with exactly the kind of power that ambitious scholars could never resist. Master Willem, Lawrence, German. These brilliant minds found the old blood, the same sacred medium that had once flowed through Queen Yharnam's veins, and they began their experiments with the confidence of those who believe they're the first to walk a particular path. But the blood carries more than healing properties. It carries memory, it carries curse, it carries the weight of every civilization that has fallen to its promise. The blood's tendency to transform its users into beasts isn't a side effect. It's the primary effect, with the healing being merely the lure. Every civilization that discovers the old blood follows the same pattern. Initial transcendence, widespread use, gradual transformation, complete collapse into besthood. We can see this cycle preserved in the game's environments like geological strata. Loran completely destroyed, nothing but sand and beasts and electrical storms. Old Yharnam burned and quarantined, its inhabitants transformed into beasts. Central Yharnam, currently undergoing the same transformation we've seen before. The Healing Church, founded by Lawrence after his split with Master Willem, represents the newest iteration of an ancient mistake. They didn't just use the old blood, they industrialized it, turned it into a religion, made it the foundation of an entire civilization. The grand cathedrals of the Healing Church, reaching toward the sky in Gothic splendor, are built on Pthumerian foundations that burrow deep into the earth. It's a perfect metaphor for how the past literally supports and undermines the present simultaneously. The Church's experiments, their attempts to evolve humanity into something greater, mirror exactly what the Pthumerians attempted with their communion with the Great Ones. The choir, seeking audience with Ebrietas in the deepest reaches of the Church, parallels the Pthumerians' worship of their own Great Ones. The school of Mensis, attempting to birth a consciousness through ritual and will alone, echoes Queen Yharnam's impossible pregnancy. Even the vile bloods of Canehurst Castle, with their corrupted blood and Queen Annalise's desperate attempt to bear a child of blood, represent yet another variation on the same doomed theme. Annalise's situation deserves particular attention because it shows how directly Queen Yharnam's curse influences those who come after. Annalise consumes blood dregs, the heaviest deposits of human blood, in an attempt to become pregnant with a special child. She's literally trying to recreate Queen Yharnam's pregnancy, to succeed where the Pthumerian queen failed. But she's working from a fundamental misunderstanding. Queen Yharnam didn't fail. Her child was born, in a sense. It just wasn't born in a way that anyone could have anticipated or desired. The blood moon that hangs over Yharnam during the hunt's climax is itself a manifestation of Queen Yharnam's influence when the moon descends close enough to the earth. When reality becomes thin enough, the queen's consciousness stirs more violently. The moon pregnant with blood, as some descriptions suggest, mirrors the queen's own doomed pregnancy. The city transforms more rapidly under its light, not because the moon causes the transformation, but because it represents the moment when past and present collapse into each other, when Queen Yharnam's ancient grief becomes Yharnam's current reality. Every pregnancy in Bloodborne is touched by this original cosmic tragedy. Arianna, the woman of pleasure who offers her blood to the hunter, becomes pregnant with a Great One's child if she survives long enough. Her child, unlike Mergo, is actually born, but as a writhing, impossible thing that drives her mad with grief. Iosefka, if transformed by the imposter, becomes pregnant with something that never fully forms. The game is obsessed with pregnancy, birth, and children because these concepts are at the heart of Queen Yharnam's curse. The failure to properly create life, the yearning for surrogacy, the impossibility of true succession. The wet nurse boss fight itself takes place in a recreation of Queen Yharnam's trauma. The arena fills with fog that obscures vision, much like how the truth of Mergo's nature is obscured. The wet nurse attacks with blades that seem to come from nowhere, protecting a child that cannot be seen, only heard. When defeated, the wet nurse doesn't drop blood echoes, it simply ceases, and Mergo's crying stops. But is this victory or tragedy? Have we freed Mergo from eternal suffering, or have we killed the only thing keeping this stillborn god's consciousness tethered to anything resembling existence? Queen Yharnam's bow to the hunter after Mergo's cries cease can be interpreted multiple ways. Is it gratitude for freeing her child from an eternal nightmare? Is it acknowledgement that we've completed a cycle she's seen play out countless times before? Or is it something more sinister? A recognition that we've now become part of the curse ourselves. Another hunter who sought to break the cycle only to perpetuate it. The orphan of Kos, found in the hunter's nightmare, provides another parallel to Mergo's situation. This Great One's child, killed before birth, exists in a state of perpetual rage and suffering within a nightmare created by its mother's grief. The parallels to Queen Yharnam and Mergo are unmistakable. Mother and child separated by death but bound by consciousness, creating nightmares that trap all who encounter them. The curse spreads not through action, but through knowledge, through contact with these impossible griefs that human minds were never meant to comprehend. The Pthumerians understood something that subsequent civilizations forgot, that the Great Ones operate on principles completely alien to human understanding. The Pthumerians served as guardians, as intermediaries, but they maintained a careful distance. It was only when they attempted to bridge that gap completely, to create a hybrid being through Queen Yharnam's pregnancy with Mergo, that their civilization collapsed. The same pattern repeats with Bergenwörth, the healing church, the school of Mensis, each believing they can succeed where others failed, each falling to the same fundamental incompatibility between human ambition and cosmic reality. The Chalice dungeons themselves serve as a kind of temporal prison, where Queen Yharnam's era bleeds into our own. These aren't just ruins we're exploring, they're spaces where time operates differently, where the past isn't really past. The queen we fight in the Hill Chalice isn't a memory or an echo, she's the actual Queen Yharnam, still fighting, still grieving, still pregnant with possibility and horror. Her blood attacks, those crimson geysers that erupt from the ground, are literally her pregnancy bleeding through dimensions, her maternal blood weaponized into instruments of vengeance. The tragedy deepens when we consider that Queen Yharnam might have been trying to save her people through her union with Oedon. Every Great One loses its child and yearns for a surrogate. Perhaps by becoming the mother of a Great One's child, she hoped to break this cycle, to create something that could bridge the gap between humanity and the cosmos. Instead, she created a wound in reality that refuses to heal, a grief so profound it shapes the fate of civilizations. The concept of blood in Bloodborne takes on new meaning when viewed through Queen Yharnam's story. Blood isn't just a biological fluid, it's a medium of inheritance, a way for the past to literally flow into the present. Every blood vial consumed, every blood dreg collected, every communion performed, they all connect back to that original source, to Queen Yharnam's bloodline that was supposed to elevate humanity, but instead condemned it. The healing blood that built Yharnam's prosperity is the same blood that ensures its destruction, carrying within it not just biological matter, but the weight of ancient sins and cosmic contradictions. When we examine the various endings of Bloodborne through this lens, they take on new significance. The Yharnam sunrise ending, where the hunter awakens from the dream, seems like escape, but we're waking up in a city named after Queen Yharnam, built on Pthumerian ruins, saturated with cursed blood. Have we really escaped, or have we simply forgotten the cage we're in? The honouring wishes ending, where we take German's place, makes us the guardian of a dream created partly by Queen Yharnam's grief. We become another link in the chain, connecting past trauma to future suffering. The childhood's beginning ending, where we become an infant great one, represents the most extreme attempt to break the cycle. But consider what we're actually doing. We're succeeding where Mergo failed, becoming the great one child that Queen Yharnam couldn't successfully birth in at all sense. We're completing her work, fulfilling her original intention, but at the cost of our humanity. We become the surrogate that the great ones always sought. But in doing so, we potentially perpetuate the very system that created all this suffering. The game's narrative structure itself mirrors the cyclical nature of Queen Yharnam's curse. We begin by arriving in Yharnam seeking healing blood, just as the Bergenwerth scholars once sought knowledge in the labyrinth. We descend through layers of horror and revelation, just as those scholars descended through the Chalice dungeons. We eventually face Queen Yharnam herself, just as someone will eventually face whatever we become. The hunter's journey isn't a line, but a spiral, always returning to the same themes, the same mistakes, the same blood. The presence of Queen Yharnam in the streets of Yharnam during certain phases of the hunt suggests that the boundaries between past and present, between the dead queen and the living city, are more fluid than they appear. She doesn't attack us during these encounters. She simply observes, weeps, and walks away. It's as if she's watching the same tragedy play out again, powerless to stop it, condemned to witness every iteration of the cycle she inadvertently created. The mysterious nature of Oedon becomes clearer when understood through his relationship with Queen Yharnam. Formless Oedon, who exists only as voice and will, found in Queen Yharnam's blood a medium through which to attempt physical manifestation. The Oedon Chapel, where survivors gather during the hunt, sits directly above the tomb where Queen Yharnam was first encountered. This isn't coincidence. It's Oedon still yearning for the child he lost, still attempting to create surrogates through the blood of those who seek sanctuary in his domain. The Pthumerian descendants who still inhabit the Chalice dungeons provide a glimpse of what happens to those who remain too close to the source of the curse. These creatures, once the proud citizens of an advanced civilization, have devolved into shadows of their former selves. The Pthumerian elders, with their walking sticks and dignified bearing, seem almost aware of what they've lost. The Pthumerian descendants, more beast than human, show the final stage of degradation, yet they all continue to guard their queen's resting places, bound by loyalty or curse to protect something that may be beyond salvation. The Bell Maidens who summon enemies throughout the game take on new significance in this context. These Pthumerian women ring bells that call forth hostile spirits and creatures. But what if they're not summoning? What if they're remembering? Their bells might be ringing out Queen Yharnam's grief, manifesting it as violence, turning sorrow into something that can strike and kill. The sinister bell's chime that signals invasion isn't just a game mechanic. It's the sound of the past invading the present, of old grief seeking new vessels, the power. Research hall patients in the hunter's nightmare, with their swollen heads and their pleas for eyes, represent another attempt to break through the limitations that doomed Queen Yharnam's pregnancy. The Healing Church tried to evolve human consciousness to a point where it could properly comprehend and commune with the Great Ones. But their patients' heads simply swelled with fluid, their minds collapsed under the weight of attempted transcendence, and they became living failures, a term that describes not just their condition, but the entire project of forced evolution. Lady Maria, one of the most tragic figures in the game, guards the secret of the fishing hamlet where the orphan of Kos resides. Her connection to Queen Yharnam is subtle but profound. Both are women who became complicit in crimes against the natural order. Both are now condemned to eternal vigilance over the consequences of those crimes. Maria guards the orphan as Queen Yharnam guards Mergo, two women bound to children that represent the horrible price of humanity's ambition. The fishing hamlet itself, where the hunters committed their original sin by defiling Kos, parallels the Pthumerian civilization's sin of attempting to birth a god. In both cases, humanity violated something sacred in pursuit of knowledge and power. The curse that Kos laid upon the hunters, condemning them to the hunter's nightmare, mirrors the curse that Queen Yharnam's tragedy laid upon all future blood ministration. Different in specifics but identical in theme. Reach too far, grasp too greedily, and create a wound in reality that will bleed forever. Consider how perfectly the name Bloodborne encapsulates Queen Yharnam's curse. The game's title doesn't just refer to diseases carried in blood, it refers to how the past is literally born through blood into the present and future. Every significant horror in the game is bloodborne in this sense, carried forward from Queen Yharnam's original tragedy through the medium of blood that connects all life in this universe. The plague, the beasts, the nightmares, all of them are symptoms of that original wound, that first impossible pregnancy that violated the boundaries between dimensions. The winter lanterns, those brain-covered creatures that cause frenzy just by being observed, might be manifestations of Queen Yharnam's consciousness attempting to process her impossible child. Their bodies are covered in messengers, normally benign creatures, fused into something horrific. They sing lullabies in a voice that sounds distinctly feminine, possibly echoing Queen Yharnam's own lullabies to a child that could never properly hear them. They inflict frenzy because they represent a maternal grief so profound that human minds cannot process it without breaking. Even the game's combat mechanics reflect Queen Yharnam's influence. The rally system, where hunters can regain health by aggressively attacking after being hit, mirrors the cycle of violence and healing that blood ministration represents. We heal through violence, just as Yharnam, the city, built its prosperity on blood taken from the dead civilization beneath it. Every aggressive recovery is a small recreation of the larger pattern, taking from death to create life, only to create more death in turn. The blood vials we inject directly into our thighs throughout the hunt aren't just healing items. They're connections to Queen Yharnam's bloodline, each injection making us more complicit in the cycle. By the time we face her in the Hill Chalice, we've consumed so much blood that we're as much her descendant as any Pthumerian. The fight isn't between hunter and queen, but between different iterations of the same tragic pattern, between past and present manifestations of the same curse. The theme of eyes, so prevalent throughout Bloodborne, connects directly to Queen Yharnam's failure to properly see what her union with Oedon would create. The game constantly references the need for eyes on the inside, for vision that transcends the physical. Queen Yharnam had the blood to commune with great ones, but perhaps lacked the insight to understand what she was truly creating. Every character seeking eyes, from Willem to Mikolash to the research hall patients, is trying to gain the vision that might have prevented, or at least understood, Queen Yharnam's tragedy. As we near the end of this exploration, it becomes clear that Queen Yharnam's revenge isn't active or intentional. She doesn't need to actively curse anyone. Her very existence, her unresolved grief, her impossible child, create a gravity that draws others into repetition. The city of Yharnam didn't just take her name, it took her fate. Every institution that arose in Yharnam, the healing church, the choir, the school of Mensis, even the hunters themselves, represents an attempt to solve or escape Queen Yharnam's tragedy, and each attempt only deepens it. The profound horror at the heart of Bloodborne isn't the beasts or the cosmic entities, or even the blood plague. It's the recognition that some wounds cannot heal, some cycles cannot be broken, some griefs are so fundamental that they shape reality itself around them. Queen Yharnam stands at the center of this horror, not as a villain, but as the first victim of a cosmic injustice that ripples outward through time, catching everyone who comes too close to the truth of transcendence. When you next walk the streets of Yharnam, remember that you're walking through Queen Yharnam's grief made manifest. Every beast you fight is an echo of Pthumerian devolution. Every blood vial you consume carries the memory of that original communion between human and Great One. Every cry in the night might be Mergo, still calling for a mother who cannot hold them, for a life that never properly began. The ultimate tragedy of Queen Yharnam's revenge is that it might not be revenge at all. It might be inevitability. Perhaps any civilization that discovers the old blood, that seeks communion with the Great Ones, that attempts to transcend its limitations, will always end up recreating Queen Yharnam's tragedy in one form or another. The Pthumerians were first, but they weren't unique. They simply established the pattern that everyone else would follow, drawn by the irresistible promise of evolution and the inescapable curse of reaching beyond what flesh and consciousness were meant to grasp. Thank you for joining me on this deep exploration into one of gaming's most intricate and tragic narratives. Queen Yharnam's story reminds us that in Bloodborne, as perhaps in life, our greatest ambitions often become our most terrible curses, and the past never truly dies. It simply waits beneath our feet, in our blood, in the names we choose without fully understanding their weight. If this investigation into Yharnam's dark history resonated with you, please consider subscribing to join our community of lore seekers. Together, we'll continue uncovering the hidden truths buried in gaming's most complex worlds. Remember, the blood makes us human, makes us more than human. But perhaps most importantly, it makes us remember, even when forgetting might be the only mercy left. Until next time, fellow hunters, may you find your worth in the waking world, and may the good blood guide your way. But never forget the price that was paid for every drop.